Seriously? Hey guys, and welcome to another Ork Tactics video with me, 6+ Stevo. And in this one we're going to be taking a look at the Weirdboy. So let's get straight into it with his stats. He has a movement of 5 inches, a weapon skill of 3+, a ballistic skill of 5+, strength 5, toughness 4, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 6, and a 6+ save. He comes in at 3 power level and costs 62 points for match play. A Weirdboy is a single model armed with a Weirdboy staff. The Weirdboy staff is a melee weapon. It has strength +2, AP -1, and D3 damage. So he's pretty good in combat actually. 3 attacks, +2 strength, so he's strength 7, AP -1, D3 damage. So he is not far off. It's kind of the equivalent to like a big chopper or something, but possibly a little bit better even, because it has the potential to do up to 3 damage. So yeah, he's pretty handy in a fight, but that's not really where you want him, at least most of the time anyway. He comes with the abilities Here We Go, Mob Rule, and Daka. Although the Daka ability will be of no use to him at all because he doesn't carry any firearms of any kind. And he has the ability War Energy. Add 1 to psychic tests taken for this model for every 10 Ork models, excluding Gretchen, within 10 inch of it when the roll is made, to a maximum of 3+. If the result of the test is 12+, this model immediately suffers perils of the warp. So yeah, this is where this guy is going to be used. Like I said, he's got some fairly competent combat skills, but ideally you don't really want him in combat because you're going to be putting him in a bit of danger there, at least not straight away anyway. His real benefits and what he brings to the table is, of course, his psychic potential. The psychic attacks that he can gain access to can be very powerful. And he's actually, in terms of psychers in the game, is one of the more powerful ones. Because with the special rule, the War Energy, of for every 10 Ork models within 10 inch of him, so he's got like a 20-inch bubble around him, basically. And typically in an Ork army, you are going to be fielding a lot of Ork models, and the chances of him being near them is high. So yeah, I think a lot of the time you will be gaining that maximum of a +3 to your psychic tests, and that makes him very reliable at pulling off his psychic attacks. That +3 is a nice buff indeed. It does come with the downside that, of course, on a 12+ he will suffer perils of the warp, and so that he'll take D3 mortal wounds. But it will still be successful. The psychic attack or the psychic power he was attempting to use, if he does roll 12+, yes, he will suffer, but he will still pull off that psychic test. So I think you just get around that by keeping a pain boy near him, and if he does fail one in that way, the pain boy can patch him up, and he can be healed up, ready to attempt another one in the next turn. And it is just 1 he gets to use. This model can attempt to manifest 1 psychic power in each friendly psychic phase, and attempt to deny 1 psychic power in each enemy psychic phase. It knows Smite psychic power and 1 psychic power from the power of the War discipline. So yeah, like all other psychers in the game, he has Smite as standard, plus 1 other that he can choose before the game. So let's take a look at those now and see what they are. So let's just move off him for the time being, move that to one side, and take a look at his powers. So of course we've got the good old-fashioned Smite, and we all know what Smite is by now. Every army's got access to it, every psycher's got access to it, but in the hands of a Weirdboy I think it's even better. So Smite has a warp charge value of 5, so easy peasy to pull off, especially if you're getting that +3. If manifested, the closest visible enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds. If the result of the psychic test was more than 10, the target suffers D6 mortal wounds instead. And this is where it's more powerful in the hands of a Weirdboy, because he's getting that +3. The chances of him rolling more than 10 is very high, actually, very high. So with the Ork Smite, he could quite easily be dishing out D6 mortal wounds. So Smite is definitely not one to ignore. Obviously, we do have to take into account that if we're using multiple Weirdboys and using multiple Smites, then the warp charge value will go up with each turn, as was FAQ'd. But that's fair enough. Smite's incredibly easy to pull off and very powerful, actually. Smite spam is very real. And then we go on to the power of the War discipline. So these are the Ork exclusive ones. And the first one we've got is Edbanger. Edbanger has a warp charge value of 8. So quite a bit higher than Smite, a lot harder to pull off. If manifested, roll a d6 and compare it to the toughness characteristic of the closest enemy model that is visible to and within 18 inches of the Psyker. If the result is higher than the model's toughness, it is slain. I've never used this one, and to be honest with you, I don't see many circumstances in which I would use it. It's going to be very situational. First off, it's the closest enemy model. So if there's a particular target you want to take out with this, everything's going to have to work in your favour. In the movement phase, you're going to have to move and ensure that that model will be the closest one. And that can be quite hard to do. And that's just one part of what makes this psychic power not the best, in my opinion. So if the result is higher than the model's toughness, it is slain. Now, that's lovely that if this works, the model is just slain. It doesn't get some mortal wounds. It doesn't get a chance to roll feel no pain, anything like that. It's just taken off the board. But most characters in the game are going to be at least toughness 4. And you have to roll higher. So you're looking at a 5+. And if something's tougher than toughness 4, I wouldn't even attempt this. If you're going up against something toughness 5, you're going to be needing a 6+. So you've got to first pass the psychic test and then roll high on 1d6, rolling a 6+. It's not going to be worth it. I mean, against some Space Marine characters and stuff, if they've got a lot of wounds but they are still toughness 4, then yes, this might be worth a pop. If you're using this as well as Smite, so you've just kitted your Weirdboy out to be casting out mortal wounds and try and slay characters and stuff, then yeah, it's another option. But no, Smite's going to be better 9 times out of 10. Like I say, if you come up against a character that is 3 toughness but has a lot of wounds, I can't think of any off the top of my head, then this maybe will be worth going. But I think most characters don't go past the 6 wounds. So I think Smite and rolling high and dishing out d6 mortal wounds is probably going to do the job anyway. So yeah, Edbanger, in my opinion, not really worth it. I don't ever see myself using it. And like I say, unless I'm coming up against an army with a very low toughness, high wound count model, but even then it's going to be hard to pull off. Anyway, getting into one of the good ones now, we've got Warpath. Now this is very cool. Warpath has a warp charge value of 7, so that's quite reasonable, fairly easy to get. If manifested, select a friendly Ork unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. Increase the unit's attack characteristic by 1 until your next psychic phase. So that's very good. So this is going to be an effect for your turn and their turn, so that's going to be very good. And obviously the obvious units we think of with this would be a unit of 30 Ork boys with +1 attack each. They're already going to be hitting on, they've already got their standard 2 attacks, +1 for the slugger chopper, +1 for being over 20 models, so they're already at 4 attacks. Now you've cast this on them, they are getting 5 attacks each, and that's if we don't have Gazgol nearby, granting them a further 1 attack. So yeah, Warpath is one of the ingredients needed to get that mythical, mystical, magical 6 attacks per Ork boy that will definitely get your opponent crying that orcs are overpowered and undercosted. Yeah, it's very, very nice. And like I say, it doesn't specify orc infantry. It can be any orc unit, so virtually anything in the codex. But I think what you really want to be doing is giving this to high model count. So like I say, 30 boys, so you're getting those 30 extra attacks. I wouldn't, for example, put this on a Gorkanaut, because you're only going to get that 1 extra attack. Although with a Gorkanaut that would translate, depending on what type of attack you were using, to 3 attacks with its special rules. But yeah, large units of Mega Knobs with their Power Claws, or a large unit of normal Knobs, or even Killer Cans would be quite good actually, increasing their attacks if you've got a large mob of 6 of them. But yeah, there you go, guys. Warpath is very, very viable and a really cool option to make your close combat even more devastating, and would terrify anyone that comes up against that. And here is probably the favourite, the Jump, and I use this one a lot. The Jump has a warp charge value of 7. If manifested, select a friendly Ork infantry unit within 12 inches of the Psyker. Remove that unit from the battlefield and then set it up anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from any enemy units. The unit counts as having moved for any rules purposes such as firing heavy weapons. So most of our units carry assault weapons anyway, so they're not going to be too worried about being teleported like this, and they won't suffer any penalties with their assault weapons. And this is, where do I begin? The Jump is amazing, and probably definitely one of the best psychic powers that the Orks have access to, because this is basically giving you deep strike on turn 1. Obviously we can't do that now, we have to wait till turn 2 before we can bring on reserves, but if we've got a unit set up on the battlefield anyway, and then we can just jump them right in the enemy's face as soon as the game begins, almost guaranteeing a turn 1 charge, provided you can make the charge. Yeah, it's very, very powerful, and there's I love using this with tank busters. It's a good way to get them where I need them, so they don't have to slog up the field and endure a load of damage and be whittled down. Also, large mobs of shooter boys can be very effective when this is used on them. But yeah, a lot of assault units, a lot of shooter units and things can benefit from this greatly. It's a really good power. The only trouble with it is that if you are going to use this, you do tend to leave yourself towards the back of the board, behind, out of the way, until you can perform this. And then it does leave your Weirdboy sort of out of the action a little bit. But following turn, he could cast this on himself and get himself right up into the battle. Then later on, able to cast Smite at the enemy. It also makes no mention on the card. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you could also use this to get your boys out of trouble. If they were in combat, you could jump them potentially out of combat, able to start shooting again without any penalties. Now, I haven't checked the FAQ on that. I really should have done that before making this video, really. But sorry, I'm going with it anyway. So if I am wrong on that, please correct me down in the comments. But yeah, that's another potential use for this. So yeah, the Jump is definitely a fan favourite and very popular amongst most of us Ork players. Next one we got Fists of Gork. Now this one I do like. Fists of Gork has a warp charge value of 6, so again, nice and easy to pull off, especially if you're using that +3. And with this type of psychic power, you are going to have him near. If he's going to be there to buff units and buff characters, then he is going to be around a lot of Ork boys. So they've got to be visible and within 12 inches of the Psyker. Add 2 to the model's strength and attacks characteristic until the start of your next psychic phase. So yeah, the obvious candidate to have this cast on them is a war boss. A war boss at +2 strength, bringing them up to potentially with their other buffs and things, you could get them up to strength 8. then the Power Claw doubles that, so a war boss can then be hitting at strength 16. He'll be wounding toughness 8 things on a 2+. Yeah, that's nice. And the +2 attacks as well on a war boss. Obviously you want to give your war boss as many attacks as possible, and this is going to make your hench powerful orc characters that much more hench and that much more powerful. Just imagine for a while casting this on Ghazghkull Thraka himself. Oh yeah, it's terrifying. But yeah, anything, he can cast it on himself, so he's already got that +2 strength from the Weirdboy staff. Adding another 2 strength is going to bring him up and bring his attacks from 3 to 5. So yeah, don't forget that he can cast these on himself as well. So yeah, Fists of Gork, very cool, very good way to buff characters and get a nasty surprise for your opponent. Now here's one I used. I have used this one, and I thought this was going to be really good. In the game I used it, it was very ineffective, but I still think there's a use for this one. This psychic power is called Decrunch. Decrunch has a warp charge value of 8, so it's one of the harder ones to pull off. If manifested, select an enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. Roll a d6 for each model in that unit. For each roll of 6, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Then roll 2d6. On a 10+, roll a d6 once more for each model in that unit. For each roll of a 6, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So this has a huge potential to dish out potentially a ridiculous amount of mortal wounds, but this must be used on the right type of unit. In the game I was using it on, I was facing small squads of 5 Terminators predominantly. There were no large squads in the army I was facing, and this ended up being fairly ineffective. I wasn't rolling very many 6s, and after using it once or twice, I then decided that Smite would be a lot more effective and a lot more reliable. Doesn't have the potential to do as much damage, but it's just a bit more consistent and reliable. So against small units of sort of 5 or less, I would say this is just not worth it over Smite, even with that chance to be able to do it once and then do it again. But if you were up against, let's say, other orcs, and you come up against a mob of 30 Slugger Boys, and you cast Decrunch on them, you're then rolling 30 dice, and for each 6, dishing out mortal wounds on them, and then getting the chance to do it all over again and rolling another 30 dice or however many are left. So yeah, large units is where you want to be using this. And I would say even with Terminators and such like that, this would definitely be worth using if you come up against a large mob of 10 Terminators. Then rolling 10 dice to dish out some mortal wounds could be fairly effective. But yeah, I would suggest using this on as larger units as possible, because otherwise it's harder to pull off and not as good as Smite. But yeah, very dependent on the type of faction you're facing and the type of units they're going to be fielding. But if they are fielding those type of units, then Decrunch has the potential to be ridiculously powerful and dish out a horrendous amount of mortal wounds. Last of all, we have the Roar of Mork. Another quite hard one to pull off with a warp charge value of 8. If manifested, subtract 1 from the leadership characteristic of enemy units while they are within 18 inches of the Psyker until your next psychic phase. So morale is very important in 40k. Certainly in 8th edition, it can make or break some of the armies. However, much like Decrunch, this ability is only going to be useful against certain factions. I think against things like Space Marines and stuff who get like a reroll, and there's lots of armies who have certain fearless units or units that have ignore modifiers, and there's certain factions and certain units that really don't worry about leadership tests. But if you are coming up against armies who have fairly low leadership, for example other orcs, then yeah, this could be very powerful, because leadership tests they shouldn't be underestimated. They can potentially finish off units when they fail leadership tests, and subtracting 1 from the leadership, that is another dead model, not just some wounds, a dead model. So and that could potentially cover a lot of units around 18 inches of the Psyker. So I guess this is a good one if you're intending your Weirdboy to be in the thick of it and in the action, and against certain types of factions, preferably already low leadership, or ones that are high leadership and you want to bring down. But yeah, like I say, against certain factions and certain units, this is going to be fairly ineffective. But it's quite nice. I don't know if I would choose it over the others, though. I think it depends. If you've got something specific in mind, then yes, this could be quite powerful, and forcing your opponent to take some leadership tests and potentially fail them by an extra 1 could cost him quite a few models. So yeah, it is quite good, but I don't think it's one that many people are going to use, because just some of the others are so viable. The Jump, Fists of Gork, for example, and Warpath are probably the 3 favourites that a lot of people are going to go for. We've also got a stratagem that we can use with the Weirdboy, and that is the Warphead Stratagem, and it only costs 1 command point. Use this stratagem before the battle begins. Select a Weirdboy model from your army to become a Warphead. This model knows 1 additional psychic power from the power of the War discipline, and can attempt to manifest 1 additional psychic power in each of your psychic phases. So this upgrades your Weirdboy to a Warphead, and he can now choose 2 psychic powers and attempt to perform 2 psychic powers each turn. He still does only get to deny the witch tests only once per turn. It doesn't increase that, because that is a different thing from psychic powers. So it doesn't make him any better defensively, but on the offensive, it's going to give him a lot more options and abilities. And yeah, you can start thinking of some quite good combinations. So obviously he can cast Smite constantly as well as another psychic power. Or if, like I say, you do want him in the thick of the action, you could have, for example, have him up there with your boys and your war boss. He could cast Warpath on the boys, Fists of Gork on the war boss, and then send them in, and they can, wreak havoc. Or you could combine one of those with the Roar of Mork. So get your war boss charged up, send him in, cause horrendous damage, and then lower the leadership to get more models taken off. Or how about the Jump and Warpath combined? Charge the boys up with Warpath and then send them in with the Jump. So now your boys have gone in there with +1 attack right into the opponent's face. This is a beautiful combination, and yeah, definitely one I intend to try out. Obviously you've got to pass these psychic tests though, so it is important to keep your Weirdboy around your other Ork units and nearby, so he can do his buffs and he can benefit from all their power around him, buffing up his psychic potential. And if you want to do that further, there is shiny gubbins that the Weirdboy has access to, and it's the Scorched Git Bones. Let me just find it here in the page. So yeah, Scorched Git Bones. Psyker only. You can add 1 to psychic tests taken by the bearer when manifesting a psychic power from the power of the War discipline. So yeah, that won't affect Smite, because that is just a psychic power. So it's only the powers that you get in the Codex. But yeah, +1. Yeah, it's going to be nice. And combined with his other buffs, he could potentially then be at a +4 on his psychic tests. The buffs make it more reliable that you get the psychic powers off, but it does also increase the risk to yourself at causing your Weirdboy some mortal wounds. But yeah, the Scorched Git Bones I probably won't ever use, because there's other stuff in the shiny gubbins section for your war bosses and things that I think are a lot better. Yeah, so unless I was going for multiple shiny gubbins with the stratagem to get that. Even then, I don't know if I'd go for this. I think I would just opt for keeping him near the boys and buffing him up. But yeah, it's an option. It's something to have. But anyway, there you go, guys. There's some of my thoughts and ideas on the Weirdboy. A really cool, powerful psychic character for your orcs. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ding the little bell icon so you don't miss any future Ork Tactics videos. This is 6 Plus Stevo, signing out.